Railways have always needed horsepower, both literally and figuratively. Before locomotives were invented that were small, cheap and powerful, many industries and urban tramways used horses, donkeys and mules to move wagons and carriages. Not every railway, however, got their horsepower from horses. Some railways instead relied on puppy power. Established in 1900, the Wild Goose Railroad served the mining company of the same name, connecting Nome to Lane's Landing in Alaska. The line was 3-foot gauge and functioned about as well as most other mining railroads in North America. In 1903, the line was reorganized into the Nome Arctic Railway and then bought out by the Seward Peninsula Railway in 1906, before finally coming under the ownership of Alaska State in 1921. Traffic was very low on the railway, the line only operating for a 4-month period between 1903 and 1905. As such, despite having a railway on their doorstep, locals were unable to travel on it due to there being little to no passenger services running. Even after Alaska State renewed the railway's equipment after their takeover, regular operation was never resumed. Horses were expensive and cars weren't readily available, so to get around, the locals relied on dog sleds. The problem was, dog sleds were only viable when there was snow, something that wasn't always around all year. So what were they to do? Well, seeing how hardly anyone used the railway, they decided to use it themselves. And seeing how they didn't have any horses or locomotives of their own to use on the line, they simply got their own carriages and had sled dogs pull them. As strange as it might seem at first, having dogs pull a carriage isn't too far-fetched an idea. For years in Europe, dogs were often used in place of horses to pull carts, either because the cart was too small for a horse to pull, or because it was much cheaper to use a dog instead. In Alaska, where dogs were already used to pulling sleds through the snow, it was easy to harness a team together and have them pull a railway carriage. Specific information on these Pup-Mobiles, as they were known, is hard to come across, but from the pictures, it seems some were used privately by individuals, while others would give people rides, sort of like a taxi service. Most carriages on the line were simply made up of whatever the locals had to hand, with railway wheels bolted on salvaged from abandoned rolling stock. Not everyone who had their own personal railcar used dogs, however. Those who owned horses would use them instead, and there were even some who had their own petrol-powered rail cars. These, however, required the driver to have a license to operate them, and so for the longest time, dogs were the go-to option for rail travel. Pup-Mobiles even made their way over to Europe. During the First World War, Decouville produced prefabricated railway tracks to allow troops to move supplies to and from the front lines. I've done a video going over the topic in more detail here. In parts where it'd be inconvenient to operate an engine or use horses to pull wagons, dogs were used instead to pull small trains, primarily in more mountainous areas. Naturally, this practice died out once the war was over, and it didn't take long before Pup-Mobiles also started to vanish in Alaska too. As the railway was free to be used by the public, by the 1930s, smaller transportation companies started running modified cars and lorries on the line, not only giving people an alternative to Pup-Mobiles, but also making it less safe for the dogs to run on. After the outbreak of the Second World War, the line was heavily used by the military, and by the end of the 1940s, the railway was worn out, while better roads and cheaper cars were becoming more available, ending the practice completely. While certainly not the fastest or most effective way of travelling on a railway, Pup-Mobiles were certainly a unique and, dare I say, adorable way of getting around. Let them be a reminder then that not everything needs to rely on horsepower. Some things work better with puppy power. Subscribe for more.